we have Maarten Goet with us. So Martin's going to be presenting to us the 52 minutes from initial access to ransomware. Is your defensive team ready? And so Martin, as we know, has been involved in cybersecurity for over a decade and has an extensive experience within the Microsoft's cybersecurity ecosystem with infrastructure, and he's the CTO of Wartel. So yeah, without further ado, I think Martin, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having me at Tech Day Pakistan. And thank you for everybody tuning in because I know it's late on your side of the world. I'm based in Amsterdam, so for me, I just cleared lunch. But thank you for tuning in. And like you said, we're going to talk a bit about ransomware, and the session's called 52 Minutes to Ransomware. So the agenda for this hour is we'll do a quick introduction. Then we'll have a look at the threat actors. What are the types of groups that could come after us, our companies or our country? We'll have a look at timeline and tactics, the tools and procedures that those groups might use to target you. And of course, we're going to have a look near the end at some defensive recommendations. What could you do to make sure that you're safe for anybody that wants to harm you in a cyber way? And of course, we'll wrap it up with some key takeaways so that you can start planning and executing on it going there next week. So like Misbah said, I'm Maarten Goet. I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity for Wartel, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP. Sometimes they joke because I became an MVP in 2007, so I guess I'm a dinosaur MVP at this point. And I'm also a regional director, which is a community title from Microsoft as well. And if you want to follow along, I do have accounts on LinkedIn, Twitter, Threads, pretty much every platform. So feel free to follow me or send me a message if there's anything I can help you with. But for this session, we are going to talk about humor. And certainly not the stand-up comedian type way, but humor in the sense of cybersecurity is the human operated ransomware. So not just any ransomware, but at some point humans and groups are in the loop targeting you specifically with ransomware, operating it to cause harm. And that's why we call it humor, human operated ransomware. And if you look back over past year, 2023, we all saw that human-operated ransomware is up. Many more attacks happening. We see it in the news, we see it online on websites, but given any country, given any region, ransomware attacks are up. And Microsoft is reporting that they're seeing over 2.5 times over what they saw in 2022. And this certainly is not something just for big enterprises or the government or any of those big corporations. No, 70%, so the majority of organizations that encounter human-operated ransomware in their network, in their company, had fewer than 500 employees. So Microsoft considers those to be smaller and mid-sized companies. So this could happen to you, this could happen to me, and certainly not just something for the enterprises. And important to note is that password attacks are still there. So making sure that your identity is secure is important because they're writing in their digital defense report that attacks have spiked over the last year. So many, many more attacks over your identities. And what's an important point from that digital defense report is that 80% of all of the compromises that happen, so the exfiltration, the ransomware, the encryption, they start with an unmanaged device, some sort of VM that you might not be managing, some sort of endpoint you might not be managing, or that's out of scope or out of sight. But they are certainly the stepping stone into whatever's next in that attack chain. So making sure that your devices are managed, that your environments in the cloud are managed is very important even today because 80% originates from those typical environments if they are unmanaged. And of course, we can have real damage. if your company gets ransomed and servers and data are encrypted, that means that you can't access those anymore and you'll have a business down situation. And you'll need to spend money, time to rebuild that infrastructure. Maybe you're even paying some of that ransom note, but the damage is real. But one of the side notes to note from damage is that this is not only infrastructure, this is not only your wallet for repairing. Now, the majority of consumers that hear about your brand getting hit by ransomware are actually prepared to move to your competitor because they will have questions and doubt about how you are protecting their data. So having a ransomware attack really impacts you in your company and can have far-lasting problems going forward. So making sure that we are defended, making sure that we have things well secured is really important also from a brand perspective. Now, you might ask, like, who are the threat actors that might be coming after me? And that's a good question because there's many out there, and certainly not one that's just coming after you. And you could probably try and bucket them in 3 categories. And this is not a full list, but this is just a way to look at all of those groups that are out there. First one would be the individuals. They could be either young people or grown-up people, but they operate on their own. They might have good digital skills. They maybe were grown up in a world where computers were everywhere. Maybe they have a computer science degree or just really good at computers. And they cause some harm. Sometimes with these youngsters, they don't know yet what the problems are that they might be causing, and they might start doing a distributed denial of service. It's really easy nowadays to go on Discord, talk to folks and pull up a botnet and start jamming the internet pipe of a company or the internet pipe of your gaming friend. And that's how they first start to cause some harm. And luckily, many of them will use them skills to go on the good side and maybe help on defenses. Some of them may cause them for other means. But these are individuals that are probably not on top of your list for threat priority, but they can do real harm. In 2018, so about 6 years ago, in Holland, in my country, the banking system was down for about 4 to 5 hours because one individual, a young guy by the age of 16, was actually doing a big distributed denial of service, and afterwards they caught him. But those are really outliers and odd situations that probably won't be on top of your threat acting. Now, the second group is much more severe. Those really are the financially motivated groups. They are the biggest groups. They are known for ransom. And the name says it all because financially motivated means that it's because of the finances. It's for them because of the money. They want to make money. This is not the legal way to make money. But for them, there aren't much more reasons than just the ransomware money they can make. And these are not just one group, there's many groups. They sometimes work together, sometimes they work alone, sometimes they share toolkits or initial access, but this is a big part of what's coming at you. And those are the types of groups that we also see in the news that have fancy names like Black Cat or Alpha Phi or something else, and they are trying to target your company or yourself. And the third category, of course, would be what I call the nation state actors. So they are targeting your country, your top government institutions, maybe your top organizations. For many reasons, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of people, and they have the time to make it happen. And this is a hard thing to solve. Like, this is not something you can just do with good security software. This is where if you're a high priority and important company for the country, then you're probably working together with government offices to make sure that you are safe from such types of attacks. But they are out there, and the nation states certainly do a lot of harm. Now, if you look at the motives, there are a few reasons why they could be coming for your company. And this is not a limited list, but this is just to show you why they would be out there. Sometimes it's for fame. Having their name in the news still is a bit of motivation. Certainly for the individuals, it's a motivation, and they want to show that they are the best at hacking companies or individuals. Sometimes it's revenge. Certainly with individuals, it's the case. But revenge could also be one group coming after another. Financial reasons, the money, we talked about it with the financially motivated groups. And if you look at the nation states, of course, it could be political motives where they have some sort of reason to target your country. And of course, the intelligence gathering, because if they have a reason to target you, they might want to steal your recipe if you are Coca-Cola. They might want to steal a chip blueprint if you're Intel. Maybe they want to have intelligence about your country. So these are things that are a motive. And of course, if you look at the nation states and you see some of the wars happening around us, then destruction is unfortunately also a motive, where they're trying to target energy stations or otherwise that run by software to make sure that they destruct something. Now, if you look at the evolution over the last, I would say 10, 15 years, then ransomware has really evolved. If you go back to the early 2010s or the mid 2010s, ransomware was probably targeting individual systems. They were trying to bring down one server. They were shooting with hail, if you will, so broad targeting, narrow impact. They would find one or two servers that were vulnerable that got impacted. And depending on the operating system, depending on the software, they might get some encryption going, but they probably had one algorithm. So it really depended on where they landed their ransomware, if it would be able to encrypt. But it was unlikely to cause catastrophic business disruption. Like one server down might be really harmful if it's your HR system or ERP system. But still, one system could be rebuilt and you might be up and running with a backup and a restore quite quickly. And how would we do defense? Well, typically via malware prevention. So we would have some sort of enterprise antivirus, something that we ran for heuristics that found known threats and would disable them if they landed on that system. That's how probably about 10 years ago we went about. Now, fast forward to today is with the human operated ransomware, it's much more intelligent. They are trying to target a specific and entire company. They are trying to look ahead and say, okay, it's this company, they're using these types of servers, these people work there, that's how we can approach them. This is their style, if you want to mimic some of those emails for phishing. And so they're really customizing the attack driven by human intelligence and planning for what's happening next. And that means that once they find out what systems you're using, they're also applying the right encryption for that system and for that data volume. And so it's very much calculated and tailored for the systems they're landing on. And it's guaranteed to cause catastrophic and visible business disruption. Like if you're targeting a full data volume, if you're targeting a virtualization environment and it goes down, probably you lose your identities, you lose your infrastructure, you lose your business altogether. So what should you do for defense? Well, it requires a lot of things. It requires not just one thing or two things, but you need some sort of holistic, integrated, and good security for the whole environment going forward. Now, the interesting piece with those groups is before they start encrypting your environment, your server, your data volume, they probably will have done some investigation, some looking around, and they're probably trying to find out like what is of value for you and your company. What are the things you care about that you don't want to share with competitors or on the internet? If you're Coca-Cola, you don't want the recipe to come out. If you're a hospital, you don't want the patient records to come out. So before they start encrypting, they often copy those important files and data back to a place they own, which is called exfiltration. And then before they, after they finish the exfiltration, they run the encryption, which means that if you don't pay the ransom note, if you don't engage with them for getting a decryption key, they have a second way of extorting you and saying, well, if you don't pay up in the next few days, then we will actually be releasing those data and those files on the internet to your competitor and to the stock exchange, for instance. So this is something that happens a lot, the double extortion, where we see encryption and ransom on one end and copying of sensitive data on the other end.
You hear a lot of rumors doing this job, and one of them that just keeps coming up is that hackers are making a killing from secret payments by major companies. But what would you do if every computer in your office was hijacked by hackers? That's what happened to a Norwegian company recently, and they faced a dilemma: to pay or not to pay. The hackers attacked here late at night. Computers everywhere changed simultaneously. The message: pay us or you'll be locked out forever. For this aluminium producer, it was a disaster. Down here on the factory floor, where these heavy-duty machines are working hand in hand with people, every minute counts. You can see why the hackers wanted to target a place like this. Everything was affected, even the computer inside this clock. And it wasn't just here, it was at the company's 170 other sites around the world. 35,000 employees forced to use pen and paper. In most sites, production was kept going just about, but it's this person's job to decide what's coming in and what's going out. And of course, without the computer, they had no idea. 5 weeks on, they're still recovering.
Yeah, so this is really important. Like when you get hit, that means that your business will go down. You will be in a stressed and in a critical situation. You will have only probably pen and paper to make sure that you can still supply some sort of service to your customers. But essentially, your business is down and you're pulling your hairs to understand what's next. And one of the questions you will be facing, of course, is, should I pay ransom? Because you will be having a ransom note, they will asking for a couple of Bitcoins, and you have the option, is what they're saying, pay us a couple of Bitcoins, and we will actually send you the decryption key for you to decrypt the volume. But is that logical? Because you're engaging with criminals. Is that allowed? Is that morally a good thing to do? But also, if you pay up, what's the guarantee that you will get the decryption key? There is no guarantee, so it's a bit of roulette if you'll get that. So that's hard. Now, the second thing to understand when you're paying ransom is those groups will understand that you and your company are willing to pay up ransom. So here's an example from November 22, where a French company, Thales, was hit for the second time by the same group and were ransomed again, apparently because they knew they would be willing to pay up. And of course, this does raise questions about how they were securing after the first incident at all. But paying ransom is a hard discussion. Now, if you're interested in how this works, well, 41% of victims do pay ransom. So this is not something small. And this also means that they're getting enough money to get their operation going and keep going and make new victims, which is sad all in all. But if you're interested in how this works, and if you think like, can I negotiate my way out of a ransomware attack? There's actually a simulator on the Financial Times website, and I'll share these slides and I'll share the link certainly. This is something that you can try yourself. There's a simulator where you can be the victim and well, negotiate and see how this works, but also be on the other end, try and be the ransomware gang and understand what the things are that you're doing to a victim. And again, just to reiterate, for them, it's about the money. Here's an example of a real discussion by an British company in healthcare that was hit by a certain group, and that group was extorting them for money. And well, the victim was actually telling them, we are considering, but know that currently patients are hurting. We're doing our best to restore operations, but the attack actually causes pain and suffering. And then if you see how the ransomware node or the ransomware gang is responding, then it's ruthless. They really see it's only about the money, and they're trying to extort you to pay up anyway. So this is sad and something that would overcome. If you were in a stress situation, this would be really, really hard. Now, we've seen an interesting third way for them to check if you want to pay up, because recently, about 3 months ago, Black Hat, one of the biggest groups out there, filed a complaint against a stock exchange admin, SEC, in the US for Meridian Link, because they were failing to report the cyber incident to the stock. And that, of course, hurts their stock price. And so for them to pay up, they were threatening them to say, we will go to the SEC if you don't pay up. So things are escalating quickly, certainly with those professional gangs. Now, this is a real economy. There's many groups active. Some of them are access brokers that will sell to you a compromised network access. Some will be activities from attackers that, try and get into the environment. And some of them will execute the ransomware, and some will even be like a help desk trying to handle your payment and trying to handle your questions. So many, many groups involved. And Microsoft was doing some research about 1.5 years ago, and they published it on a blog. And what they said is, out of the 2,500 organizations that are targeted, for which, for instance, access brokers have sold access to another group, about 60 encounter real activities where real ransomware attackers are trying to get in and will try and force impact and try and target your company. Out of those 60, actually 1 out of 3 makes a successful compromise. They get in, they find the security weakness in the network, and now they're in your network looking around and making plans. And out of those 20, they will then experience a full ransomware payload, and you will need to pay up. So 1 out of 2,500 is your chance of getting hit. And this is just increasing over the last 1.5 years. So these numbers will even be lower and worrier going forward. Now, the groups that are active are sometimes hard to track and sometimes hard to attribute. Like, who is it? Who's running it? And why? Well, because it's a digital world. And in a digital world, I can mimic and do as anybody else. So I can pretend to be a Russian attacker. I can pretend to be a North Korean attacker. And you see, if you take, for instance, this group, Dev0504, is that about 3 years ago, they were using Ryuk software. They switched to Revil, then switched to Lockmit, Black Matter, Conti, and currently they're using Black Hat as part of their ransomware activities. So even though they are a group known by Dev0504, over a time span of about 1.5 years, you see that they're changing tactics, they're changing tools, they're changing the mode of operation. So it's really hard to track, is this Black Hat themselves, is this Conti, or is this, for instance, Dev0504? But just to show you that Black Hat is currently the #1 most dangerous, damaging, and ransomware group out there. They've caused over 1 billion in lost corporate revenue last year alone. So currently that is one of the biggest gangs. And yeah, that means that you're attracting attention from government institutes. So the Alpha Phi Black Hat ransomware group was taken down by law enforcement about 3 months ago. But funny enough, a couple of days later, they were back up and online and unseizing themselves, as they call it, and announcing that they will now even be more aggressive. So it's a game, if you will, of cat and mouse, where government agencies are targeting those gangs. And of course, those gangs are trying to unseize themselves. So attribution is hard because you think you're looking at one group, Conti, Black Hat, Dev0504. But if you zoom out, it might be actually another thing altogether, where it's not the group, it's just the tools being used by another group. So attribution is hard and certainly not something that you can do yourself. And that's why it's interesting to understand and know that Microsoft has a department called Mystic, Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center. They have analysts looking at their own platform, so at Azure, Office 365, Microsoft Defender, but they're also working with intelligence agencies around the world, but also the US ones, and they're gathering information of all of the attacks that are happening and trying to bundle them into actionable information that you can use in your products, that they will feed into Defender, into Sentinel, and so forth, but also feed it into threat intel information and into what they are writing up every year. It's called the Digital Defense Report. And that's actually a free report. I would urge you to go out there, find it, Google for it, and download it, because it has real information about the threat landscape, all of the actors, all of their modes of operation, etc. But one of the key points for last year about the Digital Defense Report was that 40% of nation-state attacks are targeting critical infrastructure, which means that this is not just a game. This is really something that could hurt you, your company, or your country. And that's why we, of course, need to step up our defenses going forward. Now, if you look at those cyber activities, the activities that Microsoft is tracking, there's a lot of things happening over the world, and they align a bit with nation states that also cause some harm in the real world, like from Russia, from Iran, or China. And those nation state actors have namings like Sandstorm or Blizzard. We'll come to that in a second. But they're also tracking the financially motivated groups, the cyber mercenaries that do paid offensive activities, and the influence operations where they're trying to do disinformation, for instance, in an election year like this year. So much of the cyber activity, unfortunately, aligns with countries that do real harm in the real world. Now, we talked about DEFO 504, and you probably saw some funky names out there over the past years. But Microsoft is trying to standardize the taxonomy, the naming, if you will, of those groups, of those countries, and of those activities. And they're using the weather system as a basis. So any activity out of Russia is called Blizzard, anything out of China is called Typhoon, etc., etc. And so when we're talking about Octo Tempest recently, a blog they released, it means that we're talking about a financially motivated group that we can then track under that name instead of all of those funky names. And it's starting to become some of the de facto standards. So Microsoft is pulling their weight to standardize naming and make it somewhat easier to understand where the activity is coming from. Now, talking about activity and talking about countries, the United Kingdom was actually releasing a statement a year ago that ransomware incidents now make up the majority of the emergencies for their government. And so instead of just physical crises in the country, they're now spending lots of time with their people and with their analysts and experts on helping their countries. But certainly Australia is doing something different. Let's have a listen.
Mark Dreyfus and I announced with the Deputy Prime Minister yesterday that we're setting up a permanent standing operation, a partnership of new policing between the Australian Signals Directorate, which are the cyber guns of the Australian Public Service, and the Australian Federal Police. This is an entirely new model of operating for these two organisations. What they will do is scour the world, hunt down the criminal syndicates and gangs who are targeting Australia in cyber attacks and disrupt their efforts. This is Australia standing up and punching back.
Yeah, so what they're essentially saying is we will not wait for groups to come to us. We will be proactive about it, spend about 100 experts and stand up an operation to hack back and make sure that those groups are taken down before they can cause harm, which is an interesting approach and something we'll follow along closely as they are now stepping up their game from Australia. But why are they doing that? Of course, their companies are getting hit, their country's getting hit. It makes impact. And even today, nearby, about 2 hours from where I live, the war in Ukraine, where the fifth dimension of war, so apart from sea, land, air, and space, there's now cyber as the fifth domain, where in this case, Russia's trying to target power grids, attack them by using destroyers instead of real rockets, to make sure that those systems go down, energy goes down, and they cause real harm. So making sure that we are defended is important. And Microsoft wrote up an interesting blog about this about a year ago, last winter, when Russia was trying to target the energy systems through the winter. You saw that it aligned a lot with the physical domain, well, sending drones and rockets on those types of areas, and then using Viper software to try and reach the same thing from a cyber domain. So these are real things that could really hit you in your environment. Now, if it dazzles you, like, who are those actors again? How are they working? What should I worry about for my company? One of the things you could look at is a non-profit organization called MITRE. And MITRE has something they call ATT&CK, which tries to describe actors, techniques, tactics, tools, procedures, all of the things that are out there, document them for you to freely use and browse, but also then to make an attack navigator. So start to classify for your organization what would probably be the most common actor that could come off my company, what technique could they use, and start making sure you have use cases and defenses for them. Now, MITRE is starting to become the de facto standard. So they are now everywhere in Microsoft tooling, but also outside of Microsoft tooling. And they have matrices for enterprise, for OT systems, etc. So you could look at your Azure cloud, you could look at your Microsoft environment, and start to understand what things to worry about and what things to defend against. And they categorize it in about 12 attack kill chain stages, because every attack goes through more or less the same stages. It goes from initial access, so they enter your environment. They do discovery, so they look at your environment, what's in there. They probably execute something on an endpoint to understand, can we run software here? They probably do lateral movement for going from one system to another. They want to persist so that even when the connection goes down, they can come back in again later. Collect the information, send it back, go from a regular account to an admin account with privilege escalation, have a command and control channel to send commands to that environment, do some defense evasion, trying to get by your antivirus, exfiltrate the data, we talked about it, get some credentials, and impact is the phase where, yeah, they turn on the encryption, ransomware note is displayed, and this is where we are now in trouble. And if you think, well, that's a lot of documents, a lot of words to go through, actually, one of the analysts at Microsoft called Roberto Rodriguez has built a ChatGPT, GPT it's called, AttackMate, where you can ask the language model, like, what are the latest initial access techniques? Can you give me a top 5 for these techniques? What are the threat actors for this industry, etc.? And he published it on openai.com. So this is the URL to use it if you have a ChatGPT license. And then you can say something like, okay, give me a bar chart of the top 10 techniques versus the number of groups. It takes about 10, 20 seconds. And then it actually nicely shows you a bar chart of those top 10. Instead of you doing all the work, it's actually ChatGPT doing all the work. So this is a real nice addition from Roberto. Okay, enough scare. Let's have a look at timeline tactics, like how does such an attack evolve? And you would probably think like, oh, this was some really worrisome 0-day, something really fancy and something that just came out. Now, if you look at the initial access, the way they get into your environment for the first time, it's probably not even a 0-day. It's probably something that is just being used as a basic measure. So maybe an RDP server that was open, maybe an account that didn't have MFA, maybe something else that was low-hanging fruit. So for them to get in, don't worry about the 0 days just yet. Make sure that you have the basics in order before you progress into all of the fancy stuff. But if you bucket it into 5 categories, these are the 5 ways for them to gain initial access to your environment. So the first way would be exploiting some sort of vulnerability in an internet-facing service. So you have a website, there is some sort of leak, and they get in by abusing that leak. Second, abusing an internet-facing authentication mechanism. So that could be Azure AD, Okta, AWS, something else that is on the internet that you use for identity that they are now abusing because you forgot MFA or something else. Third category would be phishing. It's still really important that they are successful with phishing and can then do some malware on that endpoint. They could gain physical access to a network through any of your offices, for instance, environment, which would be a very rogue undertaking, but still possible. And of course, a supply chain attack. And those could be twofold. It could be that it's some sort of provider that does manage services for your environment. So they have an account with admin in your environment and they get compromised. Or it could be like software that you're using to develop something, compile something, install something on your environment for which you do not know what's in that software. So that's something we call a supply chain attack. And on the left-hand side, you find the T numbers, and those are the numbers that correspond with the MITRE attack database. So you can look up those initial access ways if you look back at the slides later. But 61% of all ransomware attacks start with identity. And that's logical because identity is the new control plane. It provides the authorizations, the authentications for you to access an environment or an application. And with the pandemic, it really accelerated. Everybody got accounts everywhere to do some remote work. And often there's still too many rights, too many access, and that could be abused. And certainly with the supply chain, the vendors, the managed services that have access to your environments, those are the things that you could worry about because the majority of ransomware attacks start with identity. And looking at Entra ID, over 250,000 attempts per minute are tried to do things like password spraying, brute force attack on the accounts that you use. But we said that spear phishing is still a thing. They're trying to do some human intelligence, like what is the people that you work with at your company, what's the style, and they try and mimic something that you can click on. So in this example, I'm sharing a file with you, and you're interested to understand for that invoice, so you click open. And if you don't have that endpoint safeguarded, malware could have already been executed on that endpoint. But they're trying to exploit our human behavior, our effective spear phishing patterns. So a coworker scheduling a meeting for tomorrow, click here to accept or decline. Do you see this cat picture laughing out loud? Those are the things that you should worry about because still many people click on those. And yeah, those could be things they are exploiting. And of course, AI, ChatGPT, yeah, those are the things that help them. They can quickly create an email template in the style of your company that looks really real. And so ChatGPT, any of those large language models is becoming almost the co-pilot of cyber criminals, if you will. And yeah, drafting a phishing email has been very, very simple with AI. But let's say you clicked on a phishing email, what's next? Well, often you land on a website which very much looks like a Microsoft authentication website. It looks like you're logging in with an account, you need to enter your password, it has the Microsoft branding, but really it's an adversary in the middle on a different domain with Evil Engine X or something that's trying to replicate the Microsoft branding. And you put in your password and on the back end, it's being sent to the real Microsoft, but they are capturing it in between. They are trying to steal your password, your cookie, and that's something we call the adversary in the middle attack. And if you're interested in how that works, well, this is where there's actually a great YouTube video by John Hammond on how to set up an Evil Engine X, a reverse proxy for phishing. And he does it in 20 minutes. And well, if he can do it in 20 minutes, you can do it. That means that attackers are really becoming experts at doing spear phishing and adversary in the middle attacks. But then you could ask, of course, okay, what if I've configured multi-factor authentication? Well, up until about 1.5 years ago, many had these types of boxes where you, on your mobile phone, you got a deny or approve message. And if it's something you don't know, you click deny. But then an attacker tries it again, you click deny, then an attacker tries it again, it's a deny. But by about the 9th or 10th time that you get the message, some people will click approve because it's annoying. It's something that you want to have go away. You don't. You're at evening. You're sitting on the bench, and so you click approve, and now the message goes away. But what happens on the back end, of course, is now it was approved. They get a cookie, and with that stolen cookie, they can now browse around the environment. So the next step that we're taking, of course, is something beyond just this, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the most recent proof that this works is, well, the Uber attack in 2022 and also the Okta attack in 2023, where a help desk person was phished, something was executed, and through adversary in the middle and MFA spamming and an approval, they got a session cookie and they were in. And again, this is not just only financially groups. Now, this is also nation states where, in this case, Ukraine is showing that they detected spear phishing against their government, trying to for them to execute a backdoor. So these are things that are out there for every big, small organization, but also for countries. So what I've done is I've took an extreme example of an attack, a real world attack, and how it went down. So let's have a look together. So by 10:40 at night, the initial access came through spear phishing. Somebody clicked on that email, went through the adversary in the middle website, put in the password, and then got the MFA spam. By that time, they clicked approve and the session cookie was stolen. And so about 3 minutes later, we saw that a device was enrolled from an actor, a threat actor. MFA settings were changed and they now had permanent access into the environment through a virtual device they had. Now, to make sure they persisted, even when we would clean up the account or look at that device, the actor added some scheduled tasks on servers that were executing SSHs, and they added some beacons from Cobalt Strike, which is a command and control framework. And this was only just 5 minutes after the attack. And why so quick? Well, they automate themselves. This is no manual labor. This is where they use their automation to execute these types of things. Next up, about 11 minutes after the initial access, was lateral movement. The actor used RDP in packet, which is a protocol tool, and remote exec, PS exec, to create services for lateral movement. And they were starting to collect credentials through enabling WY digest on Windows. And they were accessing Active Directory through volume shadow copy and NTDS util. So this was just 24 minutes after the initial access. Then they were evading the current antivirus through a vulnerable anti-rootkit driver. And they started to copy out sensitive data through SCP, which they actually in memory masqueraded as lsas.exe with a single S, which looks a lot like a Windows Server process for identities, but is really another one. And so this was just 33 minutes or half an hour after that access. They were already copying out sensitive data. Yeah, and then once that was done, about 20 minutes after, the encryption started. Just under an hour, 52 minutes, the encryption starts, ransomware node is displayed, and we were now attacked. So question to the people watching, how much time do you think it takes to encrypt about 100,000 files? And I could hear you think, yeah, that depends on processor, depends on the VM, depends on all types of things. That is true. But given a median server with about, let's say, 60 gigs of data, it would not take 8 hours. It would not take 3 hours. It would not even take 21 minutes. It would take 4 minutes for the system to encrypt 100,000 files. Why? Well, it's all in parallel. It's not doing a file after a file. No, it's doing it in parallel, using your processor to the maximum. And understand that even servers, even environments go parallel. So by the time server 1 is starting to encrypt, server 50 is also starting to encrypt. So the destructive human operated ransomware breach to full encryption is just 47 minutes. So those 52 plus about another 45 minutes means an hour and 45 minutes after the attack, I've got a business down situation. So there's not a lot of time to respond. You need to make sure you have your defenses up. Otherwise, it's a done deal, I would say. So what are defensive recommendations? What could I do to protect myself? Well, there's a lot of things you could do. And like I said, it's not just one thing. You need multiple things to make sure that you are safe from all of these attacks. Well, if 61% starts with the identity, you should probably look at identity first. Look at Azure AD, or nowadays called Entra ID, things like password protection or even identity protection if you have the license, where you could look at anomalies, unusual logins, outliers, things that are not common for your environment. And based on a sign-in risk policy, make sure those accounts get disabled even before more harm could be done. But like we said for MFA, we need to have number matching. And we probably all saw that over the last year when we need to type in a number or match a number on screen. That is really to make sure that you think twice or 3 times before hitting approve, because it takes time and effort to go in, type a number. And if it's an attacker on the other side, we don't even know the number, so we can't input it. So this is an extra measure to make sure we don't get the MFA spamming attack. And for many tenants, it was already enabled May of last year. And if it's not enabled, go ahead and do in your tenant so you're more secure. Now, if you're running Azure Active Directory on premises on Windows Server, and you probably are, then there's also Microsoft Defender for Identity. It can monitor your account, can monitor your workstations, domain controllers, but also do things like with honey tokens, and so that every time an attacker gets in and starts scanning your network, an instant trigger will be done, and this is a true positive to work from. And the same goes with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, looking at unusual processes, things that shouldn't happen, to domains or IPs that shouldn't happen. Those are the things where it can step in and already block the connectivity or the process before further things happen. And of course, if you're running things in the cloud, there's a Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So you could look at your VMs, is RDP open? How could they progress to a storage container, etc., etc. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud is something that also helps for cloud environments. Now, the great thing is that all of these Defender products come together in something we call Defender XDR. So you're not looking at 10 consoles, you're not looking at 10 sources. Now you're looking at one holistic view of all of these types of alerts. They're being mapped to the MITRE attack phases, like you could see here on the left with the purple bars. And then it correlates the information. So devices, users, mailboxes, and whatnot. Those correlate, so you could see a certain attack unfolding and of course stopping it before something else happens. And the great thing is with Microsoft Defender XDR is you could do it visually. So you could build a graph and you could go down and understand, okay, what are the things happening? How is this progressing from one system to another? Is there some information that is captured? And then really deep dive onto all of these files and information types on the right-hand side. As an analyst doing the work. And of course, we can add it into Microsoft Sentinel, which is the SIEM solution for Microsoft, that if we want to add network traffic or alerts from industrial environments, OT environments, or third parties, then those are the things we can work with from Microsoft Sentinel. And the great thing with Microsoft nowadays is that it's multi-cloud. So it's not just Azure, it's also Google GCP, it's also AWS, and not only limited to Microsoft tech. Certainly we have endpoint for macOS, for iOS, for Android, anything that you could think is probably in scope. And something Microsoft announced a couple of weeks ago is that Copilot is coming to Microsoft Defender, which means that we can work with that information with a large language model. So we can ask to Defender, what file is impacted? Could you tell me if this is a malicious file? Could you tell me if this IP address was used multiple times in the last days, etc.? So the questions you might have to yourself or to the SOC is something that Security Copilot will start answering over the next few months when it's released into general availability. So Microsoft Copilot, Security Copilot is coming to Defender as well. But one of the things we should do is really take a step back, because we just talked about the fact that attackers also use automation. So they automate themselves to speed up the attack. So there's not a lot of time that we have to defend ourselves. By the time they get in the extreme example, 1 hour, 45 minutes later, the business is down. So we need to get to a point where the machine on our end also helps. And so we need to defend at machine speed. And Microsoft is coming out with a feature calling automatic attack disruption. And what that means is that things that we know that are malicious, we can block instantly. If you've got a machine that never uses encryption, that's not a regular thing for the machine to do, and all of a sudden it's asking 100,000 files to encrypt, then this is malicious. This is something we should probably stop. Then raise the alert to the analyst for it to look at and do further investigation. But we should have automatic attack disruption. And sometimes that's hard, because if we only have one source, like an unusual login, it's hard to understand, why is this? Is this malicious, or is somebody just traveling within the country on a vacation, or did somebody just flip on a VPN and we've got a new IP address? So what happens is we need to have multiple sources to gain confidence in the fact that something is malicious. And this is really where there's a strength in the Defender portfolio of Microsoft, where we can combine information from initial access, from credential theft, from persistence and whatnot, then say, okay, going from a vulnerable service to a cookie theft to adding new accounts is certainly not normal, and it adds up to being malicious. Then stop it altogether. Automation steps in, disables the compromised account or whatever the device is, and then make sure that we step in before further things happen, further machines get hit, or that even encryption starts. So these are the things that Microsoft is working on and where we can start defending at machine speed. Other things you'll be see coming out in the next few weeks is Microsoft Defender Deception, where they're creating fake credentials, creating fake hosts and decoys on systems, to make sure that we see attackers if they come in, because you, from your business, will only be using real credentials and real hosts. So anybody that's scanning your environment for credentials or doing something where they hit those honeypots, they will instantly raise a real alert that we need to go and investigate. So I would say the key takeaways is there's a lot of things coming your way. If you're interested about these things, there's a lot of websites, including Microsoft, that write about it. But Kevin Beaumont on X and Threads, and he has a website on doublepulsar.com, has really nice information about those groups, which groups there are. He often writes pieces about what happened at big attacks. So I would certainly advise you to look at doublepulsar.com. Yeah, and understand that threats are accelerating. So have a plan. Make sure that you have a plan going forward. Maybe start by fixing the basics. That's not easy, but it's still the basics. Secure your identities. Make sure your environment is well set up. And then get some visibility with an XDR suite like Microsoft Defender, with a SIM, for instance, with Sentinel. And if you're interested in Microsoft security, Microsoft Learn has a lot of information. My colleague, Jeffrey Appel, who is an MVP at our company, wrote an ebook, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Deployment, Best Practices. And again, I'll share the links. You can get it for free if you want to know how to deploy all of this. If you can't get enough, there's a podcast episode called the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Podcast. Really worthwhile to check out. They talk to real analysts, about 30 minutes per episode about those groups. And I would close off the session by saying, well, we are no longer securing computers. We are securing society. So hope everybody will help to make sure we have a safer world. So thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Maarten. I can actually relate with this because previously one of my previous workplaces got hit by ransomware, and that was the worst situation. We were on pen and paper and running processes. Business continuity was absolutely out of the roof. So
Yeah, it's hard. Those situations are stressful.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so what do you think, apart from having a good business continuity and all these tools, I think there has to be a thorough social engineering, I mean, awareness. Do you think that's I mean, having a, disaster recovery presence and all those kind of things.
Yeah, so I
What
would
else
say it's
can?
still the 3 Ps. So it's still people involved, and people need awareness, and people can be your strongest link in defending if they are aware and they don't click phishing and whatnot. We do need processes, like you said. If you do need to recover or need to do crisis management or communication, we need to have processes, and then we need the tools. So of course, immutable backups, but also like these defensive products. Like if you only have an antivirus today, it's not enough anymore. So you need some sort of XDR, something on your identities. So you need many things, and then hopefully you can fend them off. But even that is not a guarantee. And what we're seeing is often SOCs are involved if companies have the money to involve a SOC, because yeah, you need to do this 24/7, and that's the hard part. It's not about 9 to 5. So it's there's not really one answer, but having people be aware is an important link.
For sure. Well, yeah, thanks. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting looking at all that. So yeah,
Thank you for having me.
hope to
Yeah.
have you more in upcoming, events and stuff, and have and engage in your like whatever like content are you doing, like you're producing online, and yeah, that's good. That's good to know. Thanks for the details.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Bijn team, for having me, and always happy to come back and talk to your attendees.